everyone, Alexa Donne here, and today we are going to have a little craft chat about fragments. Fragments are those wonderful things that your English teacher taught you about and told you not to use, especially in fiction. That's a fragment. I know you can't see it because it's not written down, but I put it in the outline and I was just so tickled with myself for putting a nice little fragment, a juicy fragment, into the intro. The thing is, fragments, if used well and used sparingly and smartly, can be a wonderful tool in fiction. So we're going to talk about them. I'm definitely a writer who quite enjoys using fragments, though I was slightly pleased with myself. When I went to look for examples in The Stars We Steal, I didn't find as many as I had worried, which means they had already been edited, or I'm not as bad as I think I am. Though I think that the current book I'm writing, the thriller, has a ton of them. It suits the voice of the character a lot more to use fragments a lot, and we're going to talk a bit about kind of how fragments can definitely inform character voice. But first, let me define what a fragment is. So it's kind of in the name, fragments. These are parts of a sentence that are disconnected from the main clause. Most often fragments lack verbs. Or just as often, they lack not only verbs, but main subjects as well. Often they start with gerunds or conjunctions, but not always, but essentially anytime you have like a little fragment of a sentence that doesn't have a verb or a main noun, it's not a complete sentence, it is a sentence fragment. As I mentioned, most often these can be used in fiction for stylistic reasons, for voice reasons, to emphasize something. I find that fractions go a long way to kind of contribute to snark and humor, but also sometimes building tone, especially kind of mystery tone. Like, I find in the thriller, one of the reasons I'm defaulting to them is fragments go really well with like kind of detective characters, kind of questioning things and like pointing things out. And actually what's kind of really interesting about it is I did a little bit of digging research. Like, I know enough about fragments to know I'm really not supposed to use them, and I know enough about fragments to know that stylistically they can be a good choice. But it turns out fragments are quite common in journalism, and of course I'm trained in journalism and everything makes sense now. But of course, different things for different modes of writing, and we are talking about fiction today. So the downside of fragments, if you use fragments too much, it is hackneyed writing. Writing can't be mostly fragments because then you're not actually writing in complete sentences, and then are you writing? Because writing is complete sentences in succession to talk about things and describe things and show things on the page. So you do need to have a ratio of mostly complete sentences, and then you can artfully dabble in fragments. And so some examples of fragments, as I said, I did try to find some in my own work because it's always best to call out myself rather than rely on other people's work, because no one wants to feel like, you know, a call out. So here are some from The Stars We Steal. There he was, the Elliot who clearly thought I was the very worst kind of person. Complete sentence. A spoiled princess, hardly worth his time. Fragment. So in this case, the fragment is tacked on to kind of build on the previous sentence, and it also kind of emphasizes the stutter of the character's emotions about this, kind of. The next one is, this one's funny, this is something that someone says to another person, but I thought it was a really good example. You didn't answer the question about sex on the beach. This is a case where someone is awkwardly asking someone something, and in this case, the person has ordered a sex on the beach, which is a drink, and so they say, you didn't answer the question, and then they tack on the beach to kind of cover themselves that, like, they're not asking about sex, they're asking about their cocktail, and it's kind of like a joke. So that is a comedic effect example. The next example is, she grabbed me by the arm and held me fast to her side while I squirmed. Quite the role reversal for us. Again, that's kind of a building thing on a description. And then finally, I start with the fragment, and it is friends. Yes, we could be friends. And that again is kind of a demonstration of the character's thought process. Kind of the stuttering starts and stops and lack of full sentenceness of it is demonstrating kind of what they're thinking and their emotional kind of state. In this case, this is my poor main character, realizing she has to let go of her feelings for her first love because he just wants to be friends. So those are the examples I pulled out of the earlier part of my book. I'm sure if I'd kept looking, I could have found many, many more. But so as you can see, these fragments are used artfully for emphasis or to build a punchline or for its impact, its effect. But let's say you're overdoing the fragments, someone's calling you out, maybe it's your editor, or just you know that you lean on fragments a little too heavily. So how do you fix a fragment? Most of the time, all you have to do is add a verb. It's really easy. So taking one of these examples, the last one, friends, yes, easy. We were friends, yes. There, it's a complete sentence. But the reason that I wouldn't do it in this case, so the next sentence is we could be friends. So we were friends, yes, we could be friends. That works too, but there's a bit of repetition with the we, and it feels cleaner and more impactful with the fragment first, in my humble opinion. Another option very often is to attach the fragment to the preceding sentence, usually with a conjunction or transition phrase, because very often the ideas can certainly be combined. And then of course you can also, when adding a verb, you're going to want to give it a proper subject. So it turns into a sentence where one thing is actually modifying something else rather than just being that little kind of phrase, fragment. So as I said, fragments aren't all good or all bad, and that's really how all craft is. There's a theme to so many of these craft chats, which is, this is a thing, this is a rule that exists. If you know what the rule is and you know why it's bad, you can use it sparingly. But let's, talk a bit about why you don't like fragments. So they're not complete sentences, as I mentioned, and if you overuse them and you use them all the time, it's just hackneyed, sloppy, imprecise language. It's going to lead to a very disjointed reading experience for the reader, which again is why often fragments can be a stylistic choice, because sometimes you do want to build to that, but still seriously think of your ratio. I'd say in my work, my ratio is 95% complete sentences to 5% artistically used fragments on average. In my thriller, I suspect my ratio is more 90-10. I'd say at least 70 to 80% should be complete sentences. I don't know how many fragments a person can realistically take, but that's kind of my view of the situation. But the warning I kind of want to leave you on is that fragments are very subjective because they are a stylistic choice. And so you may find first that certain readers and CPs really won't like them, then agents might not like them, and then editors might not like them. So you could end up in a situation where an agent or an editor, especially kind of on the publishing back end, does ask you to or makes you change them. All edits are technically optional, but if you find that you are being dinged on a lot of fragments, I do encourage you to change as many of them as you can so that the ones you decide to keep have greater impact. And I'm just going to leave you with a few more examples from Purdue's website. They have wonderful writing resources because I kind of like some of their examples outside of fiction that kind of show you how disjointed these fragments feel. So the first example is Purdue offers many majors in engineering, period, such as electrical, chemical, and industrial engineering. So the fix there is instead of a period after engineering, it's a comma, and then that is a much more robust, complete sentence. Purdue offers many majors in engineering, such as electrical, chemical, and industrial engineering. Now you know that about Purdue, don't you? But that's a great example of a fragment that has the such as that is just like floating out by itself. I don't think that works so much for dramatic effect. That is just not really correct. Here's another example. Coach Dietz exemplified this behavior by walking off the field in the middle of a game, period. Leaving her team at a time when we needed her. That again is another example where the fragment is just awkward. It really should be connected to the first sentence. And again, you can just change that nice little period into a comma and smush them together. Here's another cool one that's a little more complex. The current city policy on housing is incomplete as it stands, period. Which is why we believe the proposed amendment should be passed. I think this is a great example where technically this is a stylistic choice. This is the kind of phrasing that you might see in journalism, but I really quite like the revision suggested as a good example of how to condense and combine for a much smoother sentence, which is, because the current city policy on housing is incomplete as it stands, we believe the proposed amendments should be passed. That is a much more concise and straightforward sentence, especially, and that is clearly some nice nonfiction policy-esque writing, and it works really well there. So that is more kind of, academic-y writing or straightforward writing. And I think those are great examples of the difference between using it effectively in fiction for impact versus something that's just awkward or wrong. I'm gonna leave you there. I just thought this would be an interesting topic because I am a fan of fragments. Let me know down below in the comments, do you also use tons of fragments when writing? Do you have any kind of tips or tricks for how you approach fragments in fiction writing? And of course, I will have links down below to the resources I mentioned. The Purdue website is a really good one. Anytime you wanna educate yourself or refresh yourself on grammar, I highly recommend it. This video isn't sponsored. I just use that resource a lot to refresh myself. Give this video a thumbs up if you like it, and we'll do more crafty chats where basically I explain things to you but then tell you if you know the rules you can break them sparingly, which is my favorite thing to do. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do that. I post new videos 2 to 3 times a week. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and as always, happy writing.